I knew she saw it the moment she stepped into the courtyard, the faint curve at the corner of my mouth that absolutely did not match the crushing defeat she expected me to feel. She froze like she'd walked into a wall of ice, standing there barefoot with her victory still warm from the night before, her hair tied up in that careless knot she always wore when she expected a man to look at her. Even now, after the papers were signed, after she walked out of the courtroom with the house, the car, the savings, and even alimony, she moved like she thought she still owned every room she entered. But that morning, she didn't own mine. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the steam rise between us. She had always been good at reading me, too good, so the fact that she couldn't place the expression on my face unsettled her more than any words could have. There was a flicker in her eyes, something sharp and uncertain, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the upper hand shift without me having to say a single thing. "You look different," she said, her voice lighter than it should have been, as if she were trying to pretend she hadn't spent half the night celebrating her so-called victory with champagne and whatever company she preferred to keep now that she was free. Most people don't exactly beam after losing everything. I didn't answer at first. I just stood there, leaning against the railing, letting the early sunlight hit me. It warmed my shoulders and made me feel strangely alive, almost electric. The breeze carried the scent of the jasmine plant she once insisted on buying, the one she thought I wouldn't be able to keep alive. It had bloomed beautifully overnight, almost theatrically, as if joining me in the quiet rebellion of that smile. "I slept well," I finally said. "Better than I have in a long time." She blinked, and there was something almost imperceptible, some tiny trembling edge to the confidence she always wrapped herself in like armor. The robe she wore slipped a little off her shoulder, revealing the familiar curve of her collarbone, and although there had been a time when that would have drawn me in like gravity, now it only reminded me how much I had lost myself trying to love someone who never loved me back without calculating what she could take. "You're handling this unusually well," she said. It was meant to sound casual, but I knew that tone too well. It was the same one she used when she thought someone was hiding something from her. She leaned against the doorway, the silk of her robe shifting with a soft whisper, her gaze moving over me as if trying to decode my posture, my expression, even the way I breathed. She expected devastation. She expected me to break. She expected me to be the same man she had spent years conditioning, quiet, yielding, grateful for her smallest crumbs of affection. She expected to walk away from this divorce glowing, triumphant, radiant in the way she always became after she'd manipulated a situation to her advantage. But now she saw something else, something she had never seen on me before. It wasn't joy. It was anticipation. She stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. Her perfume, light, warm, familiar, drifted toward me, sparking memories I'd thought would sting. Instead, they only made me feel more certain, more steady. "You're not angry?" she asked. "Not even a little?" "Oh," I said softly, letting the smile widen just slightly. "You have no idea what I am." That was when the first real crack appeared in her composure. Her lips parted, and she stared at me the way someone stares at a shadow they didn't expect to see move. For the first time since the divorce began, she didn't look victorious. She looked afraid, and all I did was smile. People like to believe betrayal happens all at once, in a single earthquake moment that splits a life cleanly into before and after. But with her, it wasn't an earthquake. It was erosion. Quiet, steady, patient. The kind you don't notice until one day you look down and realize the ground under your feet has already disappeared. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't blind. I just wanted to believe the woman I married wasn't capable of the things she eventually did. So when the first odd withdrawal appeared, I dismissed it. When she insisted a joint decision had been made about shifting our savings into a better account she swore her cousin recommended, I let it slide. And when she pushed papers across the table with a kiss on my cheek, warm, lingering, the kind she used to distract me, I signed without reading every line. I wasn't naive. I was in love. There's a difference. But love stops protecting someone the moment they weaponize it. The day I realized something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday, a gray one. I had come home early and she wasn't expecting me. Her laptop screen was still open on the kitchen island, angled toward the window but not enough to hide the account statements glowing back at me. My name was on several of them. My signature, except it wasn't mine, sat at the bottom of agreements I'd never seen. Transfers I didn't authorize. Decisions I never made. What struck me wasn't just the numbers. It was how calm she looked when she walked in and saw me standing there. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She just slipped her coat off and said, "You're home early," as though I were an inconvenience, as though I weren't staring at the evidence of my own financial gutting. That was the moment the love didn't protect her anymore. I didn't confront her. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. Instead, I started collecting everything. Receipts she thought I didn't care about. Emails she assumed I never read. Bank logs she believed I'd never understand. Screenshots of every inconsistency. Records of every transfer, every joint expense, every debt she'd quietly shifted onto my back. She had no idea that while she was seducing judges and charming attorneys with that polished confidence of hers, I was building a ledger, my own private Bible of the truth. The more I uncovered, the more I felt something dark and steady growing inside me. Not hatred, not even revenge, just clarity. She had drained me for years, drop by drop, smile by smile, kiss by kiss, and she genuinely believed she'd gotten away with it. During the divorce, I watched her lean close to her cousin, the attorney with that slick, arrogant confidence, and whisper strategies they clearly thought were brilliant. She'd brush her hand through her hair and glance at me with that glittery superiority, as if the courtroom was just another stage where I existed purely for her to defeat. She thought she won because she saw what she took from me. She never saw what I saved. I kept my records hidden, quiet, meticulously organized. She thought I was defeated. She thought she'd drained the last drop of resistance from me. But she didn't know the truth. My smile that morning wasn't joy. It was anticipation. It was the look of a man who had stopped drowning and finally found the ocean floor beneath him. It was the look of a man who knew that everything she stole, every forged decision, every secret transfer, every accidental misfiled document, was about to breathe in the open air. She didn't know it yet, but her victory had a timer on it, and I was the one who set it. The first crack didn't come from anything I did. It came from a perfectly ordinary envelope, white, unremarkable, the kind that blends into a stack of bills without announcing the disaster folded inside. I wasn't even there when she opened it. I only heard about it later from a neighbor who watched her step outside to check her mail and freeze, her smile flickering like a candle exposed to wind. The letter was from the state tax office, a routine audit request, routine for anyone except her, because she knew, instantly, that her cousin, the attorney who guided her through the divorce like a smug puppeteer, hadn't been nearly as careful as he claimed. She knew the filings had been rushed. She knew certain numbers weren't just sloppy, they were dangerous. And even if she didn't admit it openly, some part of her must have recognized that she had been too greedy, too certain of her own brilliance, too confident she'd never be caught. She tried calling me that afternoon. I let the phone ring twice before answering, just long enough to make her wonder whether I would. When I finally picked up, her voice sounded wrong. Not panicked, not yet, but stretched thin, like she was trying to hold herself together with charm she hadn't fully assembled. "So," she began, forcing a breathy laugh. "Interesting mail day. Did you get one of these audit things too?" Ah, she was pretending it was both of ours, pretending we were still a unit, pretending the mess was mutual, shared, evenly distributed between us like the marriage she had rewritten in court. I let silence settle for a beat. Silence has weight when used correctly. Silence makes a person reveal more than they intend. When she realized I wasn't going to fill the air for her, she tried again, her tone a touch sharper, tinged with something almost Needy. I mean, it's probably nothing, she said. These things happen all the time. A random pull. Just a check. She wanted reassurance. She wanted my steadiness. She wanted the calm she spent years draining out of me. Maybe, I said. The word wasn't much, but it made her inhale sharply. You're not worried? She asked, too quickly, too eagerly. I could almost see her pacing, robe tied tight, hair falling loose, that knot of hers unraveling the way her composure was beginning to. Even now, even after everything she'd taken, there was a strange tension between us, something warm and charged and complicated that neither of us fully understood. Attraction isn't always tied to affection. Sometimes it clings to old patterns, to the memory of closeness, to the way two people once knew each other better than anyone else. But she didn't want me. She wanted my stability. She wanted the version of me she could siphon from. I'm sure, I said, my voice calm, steady, almost soothing, that it'll all work out for you. She froze on the line. I could hear it, her breath halting, her uncertainty tightening like a rope around her throat. For me? She repeated. Yes, I said lightly, letting her imagination fill the space. Everything they're looking for is yours after all. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe. She simply existed on the other end of the phone, suspended in a silence she didn't know how to break. I didn't give her the chance. I've got to go, I said, warm but distant, familiar but unreachable. Good luck. And I hung up. Later, a different neighbor mentioned she'd seen my ex-wife standing outside afterward, phone still in her hand, staring at nothing. The robe she wore clung to her shape in the breeze, the silk shifting over her like a second skin. A few years ago, that sight would have pulled something primal from me. Desire, nostalgia, the ache of wanting the woman she had once pretended to be. But now I watched from my window as she wrapped her arms around herself, the first real tremor of vulnerability slipping through her perfect posture. That was when I knew. She felt the walls closing in, even if she couldn't see them yet. And I didn't have to push them. All I had to do was let them fall. The strange thing about divorce is that people you haven't heard from in years suddenly remember your number. Some call to gossip, some to offer sympathy, and a few to disguise their curiosity as concern. But the three people who reached out to me that week were different. They weren't curious. They were relieved, almost eager to talk. The first was Marin, her former best friend. I hadn't seen her since she and my ex-wife fell out over something vague and dramatic, the kind of disagreement my ex always blamed entirely on the other person. When Marin texted asking if we could meet, I expected awkward conversation, maybe polite small talk. Instead, the moment she sat across from me at the cafe, she let out a breath that seemed to release years of tension. I'm glad you're out, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. You have no idea how long I hoped you'd wake up. Wake up. That phrasing lingered. She leaned in, lowering her voice as if my ex might materialize behind her. She did the same thing to her last partner, and the one before that. Drained them, twisted every situation to make herself look like the victim, and walked away with everything she could carry. I felt a slow, steady heat rise in my chest. Not anger, just the confirmation of something I'd always suspected, but never allowed myself to admit. Marin looked at me then, not with pity, but with something like recognition, maybe even admiration. And for a moment, there was a flicker of something warm between us, subtle, but unmistakable. She'd always been beautiful in a soft, striking way, but back then, I never let myself notice. Now, her gaze lingered on me a beat too long, and I understood she wasn't just here to rehash old stories. But this wasn't the time to explore that. Not yet. Next came her former business partner, Lucas. He invited me to a bar, where he nursed a drink like it held memories he didn't want to revisit. He admitted she had nearly destroyed his reputation years ago, with the same polished confidence she'd weaponized against me. He warned me that she was reckless when she believed she couldn't lose, and vicious when she believed she was cornered. You think she's unraveling now? He said, shaking his head. You haven't seen anything yet. The moment she senses a threat she can't define, she lashes out at everyone around her, even the people she thinks she still loves. I didn't tell him that she'd tried calling again earlier that day. I didn't tell him how her voice cracked around the edges, how she asked, not quite calmly, whether I had looked through my own mail. I didn't tell him how she paused before hanging up, as if she expected me to rescue her from whatever storm she felt circling. Instead, I simply nodded, because he was right. But the third reconnection was the one that shifted everything. Her sister. The two of them hadn't spoken in years, not since a brutal argument that left both of them bruised emotionally in ways neither ever healed. When she messaged me, I hesitated. She had always been the opposite of my ex, a steady warmth instead of polished ice, grounded instead of calculating. Seeing her name again brought back a complicated twinge of familiarity, even a hint of the attraction I used to feel, but never allowed myself to acknowledge. We met in a quiet park, sunlight threading through the trees as she walked up to me with that same gentle confidence she'd always had. When she hugged me, it wasn't dramatic or lingering, but it felt real in a way I almost wasn't prepared for. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I should have warned you. I knew what she was capable of, but you always seemed so certain she loved you." "She did," I said, "just not in the way love is supposed to work." She nodded with an understanding that made something tighten in my chest. "There's something you should know. She didn't just take from you. She enjoys taking. It makes her feel powerful. And when she feels threatened," her eyes met mine, steady and earnest, "she becomes unpredictable." There was a long moment where neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, not romantic, not yet, but undeniably intimate in the shared clarity of someone who had witnessed the same storm from different angles. When I left the park, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Certainty. Each person had given me a piece of a puzzle she thought she'd hidden perfectly, a map of her patterns, a guide to her unraveling. And as I walked home, the pieces locked into place. My strategy wasn't revenge, it was accountability, and she had carved every step of the path herself. The thing about truth is that it doesn't reveal itself in grand bursts. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a draft slipping under a door, and sometimes it hits with the force of a punch you never saw coming. For me, it arrived as a notification, an email alert from a bank I didn't recognize, referencing an account I had never opened. At first, I thought it was a scam. I almost deleted it, but something in the subject line made me pause. Activity alert for line of credit. Under your name. My name. A line of credit. An institution I had no relationship with. By the time I clicked the link and logged in with the temporary credentials they'd emailed, I felt that familiar chill crawl down my spine. The same one I felt the day I saw her laptop open, numbers glowing like warning signs I hadn't understood. There it was, a credit line, large, active, opened during our marriage, with my signature, except I had never touched that application, never seen it, never authorized a single cent. My pulse hardened as I scrolled through the transactions, the transfers, the deposits, the withdrawals, all funneled into an investment account in her name, one she must have believed she'd hidden so well that even God couldn't find it. But I found it, in 10 minutes. My hands were steady, calm, too calm. Shock didn't hit me. Rage didn't hit me. Something colder did. Clarity. She hadn't just siphoned money from me. She had committed fraud as me. And suddenly the audit made sense. Too much sense. She wasn't just greedy, she was sloppy. And her cousin, the smug, self-proclaimed legal genius, had been even sloppier. I spent the next 2 hours digging through every file I had collected over the years. The receipts, the statements, the screenshots, and piece by piece, a timeline formed. A perfect narrative of every forged signature, every joint decision I never participated in, every lie she wrapped in silk and handed to me like a gift. By the time I finished, the sun had set. My room felt heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves understood the shift. I should have felt betrayed. broken. But instead, I felt something dangerously close to satisfaction. She thought she'd won, but she had built her victory on a foundation of crimes, real ones, traceable ones, punishable ones, and every breadcrumb led directly to her. I didn't hesitate, not for a second. Filing the identity theft affidavit was shockingly easy, almost too easy. I filled out the forms, attached my documentation, wrote the clearest summary I'd written in my life. Every word was a blade she'd sharpened herself. And when I hit submit, I felt something uncoil in my chest. Freedom, maybe, or justice, or the deep, steady realization that I no longer needed to fear her manipulations. She had crafted her own downfall meticulously, elegantly, without even realizing it. When I stepped outside afterward, the night air felt cool against my skin. I could still feel the echo of the tension from earlier, but beneath it was something strangely peaceful. I breathed out slowly, letting the city's hum settle around me. That was the moment she texted me. 3 words. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. Not yet. I looked at the screen, then at my reflection in the darkened window, calm, steady, almost radiant. I realized something. This was the smile she saw that morning, the one that rattled her, the one that planted that first seed of paranoia. Because somehow, she knew. Maybe not the details, but the threat, the inevitability, the shift in power she couldn't control. For the first time, she sensed she was no longer the one pulling strings. She was the one tangled in them. And the best part? She tied every single knot herself. When the real collapse began, it didn't start with a bang. It started with a silence so sharp it felt like the air itself was waiting. My ex-wife had lived her life with noise, calls, deals, arguments, laughter that sounded rehearsed, heels clicking like punctuation marks announcing her presence. So when that noise stopped, when she went completely quiet for nearly 2 days, I knew something had shifted inside her world. The first sign came in the form of a message from her cousin, the lawyer. Not to me, of course. He would rather swallow nails than admit he needed something from the man he thought he'd beaten. But mutual acquaintances talk, and apparently he'd been trying to clarify some filings at the tax office. Filings that weren't just sloppy, they were dangerously inconsistent. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. By the afternoon, the second hit landed. The bank froze her accounts. Not all of them. She had many, most hidden in the ways she thought were clever. But the one tied to the fraudulent line of credit was locked within minutes of the affidavit being processed. The moment she realized she couldn't access a cent of it, she must have felt the first true wave of panic. And within an hour, she was on my doorstep. She didn't knock. She pounded. Hard. Urgent. The kind of pounding people do when they're trying to keep their world from sliding off a cliff. When I opened the door, she stood there breathing fast, hair wild, her usually flawless appearance cracked by stress. She wore one of her fitted blouses, deep burgundy, the kind she knew once drew my eyes to her without effort. Even now, even angry, she carried a magnetism she had always weaponized, but today it flickered instead of glowed. "What did you do?" she demanded, pushing past me into the hallway. Her perfume rushed in with her, a familiar warmth that used to stir something in me, something complicated and undeniably physical. But today, it mixed with the sharpness of her panic, turning it sour. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, closing the door behind her as calmly as if we were discussing weekend plans. She spun around, eyes blazing. Don't play dumb. The audit, the frozen accounts. My cousin won't even return my calls. Something's happening, and it started after that stupid smile you gave me yesterday." I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of the strange ease that washed over me. For years, she had held all the power, dictating the direction of every conversation, every argument, every decision. But now she stood there unraveling, demanding answers from the one person she believed too weak to ever push back. "I didn't do anything to you," I said. I just stopped carrying the things you built on my back. Her face twisted. Don't talk in riddles. I need to know what you told them. Told who? I asked. She stepped closer, so close that her breath skimmed my cheek. Not seductive, desperate. But the proximity still sent a faint shiver along my spine, a reminder of the intimacy we once shared, of nights when her closeness meant something entirely different. It startled me how easily the body remembers what the heart has erased. The bank, the auditors, whoever you think you're punishing. Her voice cracked, just barely. You're ruining my life. I held her gaze, steady and unshaken. No, I said quietly. You did that. I just stopped shielding you from the consequences. Her lips parted, trembling. For a split second, something softened in her expression. Not love, but recognition. The realization that the man standing in front of her wasn't the same man she'd manipulated into silence for years. You're lying, she whispered, almost pleading. You have to be. I shook my head slowly. Everything that's happening is a result of your own choices. I didn't need to ruin anything. I just needed to finally let the truth breathe. She stood there staring at me, chest rising and falling too fast, eyes glossy with the kind of fear she would never admit out loud. And in that moment, something unexpected flickered between us, a strange, charged tension made of old intimacy and new power. She recognized it too. I saw the way she swallowed hard, as if her body betrayed a memory she didn't have the luxury to feel. Then she stepped back. You're going to regret this, she said softly. Not threatening, not confident, just hopeless. And she left. As the door clicked shut, I realized something profound. She wasn't afraid of losing money. She was afraid of losing control. And that loss had only just begun. Rumors don't walk, they run. And in her world, where status was currency and perception was power, even a whisper carried the force of a wrecking ball. I didn't spread anything. I didn't need to. All I did was file the affidavit, give the auditors what they asked for, and step back. Truth has a way of leaking through cracks faster than lies can patch themselves. Within a week, I began hearing things. Small things. Sharp things. A colleague of hers mentioned that clients were reassessing their partnerships. Another said she'd shown up to a meeting visibly shaken, hands trembling as she tried to maintain the poised facade she'd always relied on. She'd built her image on perfection, clean lines, flawless logic, and the polished smile of someone who never made mistakes. But now people were seeing something else. The fractures. Her cousin, the lawyer who once strutted around like he owned the courtroom, started avoiding her. Not openly, not with drama, but with silence. Missed calls, unreturned messages, delayed replies that stretched longer and longer, until she realized he was distancing himself the way a person does when they see a storm approaching and want no part of its destruction. He knew. He knew this time he couldn't fix her mess. Not with charm, not with loopholes, not with legal gymnastics. I heard from her sister again, too. She sent me a single text. She's spiraling. And there was a part of me, buried deep, almost forgotten, that felt a faint echo of sympathy. Not for her actions, not for the consequences she earned, but for the version of her I once believed in. The woman I married had been vibrant, alive, intoxicating in a way that pulled me toward her, as if gravity itself tilted. I remembered nights when she talked about her ambitions with a fire that made me want to protect her, support her, love her. But that fire had long ago become something else. Consumption, not passion. Still, remembering the earlier version of her made the current unraveling feel heavier than I expected. Then came the moment that confirmed, without question, that her world was truly collapsing. I ran into one of her clients, someone I'd spoken with at social events when we were still together. He approached me awkwardly, clearing his throat before leaning in conspiratorially. I heard about the situation, he said, lowering his voice. I'm sorry. I know this must be difficult. I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him I wasn't the one facing an audit, frozen accounts, or potential charges. I simply nodded and let him continue. She's been missing meetings, avoiding calls. People are starting to worry she isn't stable. He hesitated, then added, some are pulling out contracts. Quietly, of course. Quietly. Of course. Reputations never shatter loudly. I thanked him and walked away, but the conversation lingered. I realized then that the delicate network she'd weaponized for years, clients, colleagues, connections, was dissolving thread by thread. And then, the unexpected happened. She called me. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity, or maybe a leftover strand of old emotion, made me swipe the screen. Her voice was nothing like the woman who once charmed rooms effortlessly. It was hushed, raw around the edges, trembling with a fear she couldn't hide. "Did you talk to them?" she asked, skipping any greeting. "Talk to who?" I replied, keeping my tone soft but distant. "Everyone," she said. "Clients, my supervisor, my sister. Someone's saying things. Someone's making me look like a criminal." There was a brief, sharp pause. I could hear her breathing, shaky, uneven. Her composure had always been one of her most seductive traits, an elegance that wrapped around her like silk. Hearing it unravel felt strangely intimate, though not in the way it used to. It wasn't attraction. It was recognition of the power shift she couldn't deny anymore. "I haven't spoken to anyone about your situation," I said. "I haven't needed to." "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," I said gently, "the truth has a voice of its own." Silence followed, a real heavy silence. Then she asked, almost pleading, "Are you going to keep doing this to me?" And I answered with the most honest words I'd spoken to her in years. "I'm not doing anything to you. Not now. Not ever again." Her breath hitched, the sound so faint I almost missed it. She wasn't afraid of punishment. She was afraid of accountability. Fear of losing her reputation, the shield she used to control everyone, was finally settling in. As the call ended, I could picture her perfectly, standing alone in her immaculate apartment, the place she stole from me with smug certainty, staring out at a world she could no longer manipulate. For the first time, she wasn't admired. She wasn't envied. She wasn't worshipped. She was exposed. And all I had done was let her truth surface. She showed up again, but this time she didn't burst in with the fury of a cornered predator. She didn't shout or accuse or demand. No, this time she knocked. A quiet knock, one that barely carried through the door, as if she wasn't sure she deserved to be heard at all. When I opened it, she stood there with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her confidence stripped down to something raw. She didn't look like the woman who strutted out of the courtroom with the glow of a victor. She looked like someone who finally realized the ground beneath her had never been solid. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, not because I feared her, but because I could feel how different the energy was this time. There was no manipulation in her posture, no seductive tilt to her voice, just exhaustion, fear, and something else, something like longing, though I couldn't tell whether it was for me or for the power she no longer held. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, her gaze drifting around my living room as if she expected it to be in ruins. Maybe she wanted to see proof that she'd broken me. Maybe she was terrified she wouldn't. "Are you happy?" she asked suddenly. "Is that what this is? You wanted to watch me suffer?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I saw the woman I once knew, the one who used to curl against me at night, tracing circles on my chest as if I were the only safe place she had. The image hit me harder than I expected, stirring an old ache I thought I'd buried. "I didn't plan any of this," I said. She laughed, a weak, bitter sound. "Of course you did. You've been waiting for this moment. You wanted revenge." I shook my head. "No, I wanted peace." She turned toward me fully then, eyes searching my face for something familiar. Her expression softened, as if the walls she'd always kept up were finally sagging under the weight of truth. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You're supposed to be angry. You're supposed to be broke. You're supposed to be devastated. The confession hung between us like a confession of desire, vulnerable and strangely intimate. But then I said the words that broke her. I rebuilt my finances years ago. She blinked. What? I knew something was off, I continued. Long before you filed for divorce. Long before the forged signatures. Long before the transfers you thought I wouldn't notice. She took a step back, her breath catching. You're lying. I'm not. Another step back. You don't have to believe me, but everything you drained from our accounts, I replaced it. Quietly. Consistently. You never destroyed me. You just freed me. She stared at me as if I had slapped her. But it wasn't anger filling her eyes. It was disbelief. Devastation. And underneath it, something like heartbreak. You weren't supposed to recover, she whispered. You weren't supposed to move on. There it was. The truth she never meant to say out loud. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. You planned this, she said, her voice trembling. You let me think I won. You let me take everything because you already had a safety net. No, I said quietly. I didn't let you take anything. You took it because that's who you are. My safety net wasn't for revenge. It was for survival. She pressed a hand to her chest, the fabric of her blouse tightening with the movement. There was a strange, painful beauty in her then, a vulnerability she never allowed anyone to see. It stirred something deep in me, not desire exactly, but memory, the muscle memory of loving her, the ghost of wanting her. Did you ever love me? She asked. Yes, I said, more than you knew. Do you still? The question was barely audible, but the tension that followed was electric, charged, almost suffocating. For one suspended moment, we weren't exes or adversaries or victims of each other's flaws. We were two people who once wanted desperately to be understood, standing inches apart with a lifetime between us. I exhaled slowly. No, I said, but I'm not your enemy either. Her knees nearly buckled. She caught herself on the back of the couch, staring at me with the expression of someone who'd spent years believing she was untouchable, and was finally realizing she wasn't. So what now? She whispered. Now, I said gently, the truth plays out. That's all. Because the truth, not me, was the thing unraveling her, and she knew it. You can always tell when a person reaches the point where running is useless. Something in their posture caves inward. Something in their eyes admits a truth their mouth still refuses to form. For her, that moment didn't come with the audit letter, or the frozen accounts, or the clients walking away. It came the morning she learned her cousin, the cousin she trusted more than anyone, was no longer willing to burn for her. I heard about it before she told me herself. Word spreads fast when professionals start scrambling for immunity deals. Her cousin had walked into the investigator's office with that false confidence he always wore, and 5 minutes into questioning, he folded. Completely. He laid everything out. The forged signatures, the doctored filings, the accounts she'd funneled money into. Not out of guilt, not out of morality, out of self-preservation. The moment he realized he'd been caught, he sacrificed the person he once coached through every deceit. When the news reached her, she didn't show up at my door. She didn't call. She didn't even text. She disappeared for 2 days, long enough that even I wondered what she might be capable of when cornered so completely. Then, on the third night, she arrived. Not with fury, not with rage, but with the quiet, staggering steps of someone whose pride had been stripped away one brutal layer at a time. When I opened the door, she stood there drenched from the drizzle outside, hair clinging to her face, eyes raw with something that didn't look like anger anymore. Everything's gone, she whispered. They're charging me. I stepped aside wordlessly, and she walked in like a shadow of the woman she once was. She didn't collapse dramatically, didn't demand anything. She just sat on the edge of the couch and stared at her trembling hands. They said I could face jail time, she said. They said the only reason my sentence might be reduced is because of the documentation you kept. Your clarity, your records." She let out a breath that shook her entire frame. "They called you the victim." I nodded. "That's what I was." She looked up at me, and the pain in her eyes was almost unbearable. Not because I still loved her, but because I remembered a version of her before she became this. A version who could laugh, who dreamed, who believed love was something soft instead of something she could weaponize. "You could have destroyed me years ago," she whispered. "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want to destroy you," I said softly. "I wanted you to stop destroying me." Her breath hitched. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It wasn't tense. It was heavy, like two people mourning the same ghost. Our old life, our old selves, the versions of us that might have stood a chance before, lies grew sharper than love. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "My parents won't speak to me. My friends think I'm a manipulative fraud. I keep hearing whispers everywhere I go. Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. "I don't know who I am without the reputation I built." And there it was, the truth at the center of her unraveling. She didn't fight for the money. She fought for the image. "People didn't destroy your reputation," I said. "Your actions did." She closed her eyes. "You're right. And that scares me more than anything." For a long moment, she just sat there. The rain outside softened, tapping gently against the windows like a reminder that the world kept going regardless of our personal catastrophes. Finally, she whispered, "Is there anything you can do? Anything you will do?" I shook my head gently. "This has to play out. Not because I want to see you suffer, but because accountability is the only thing that will stop you from repeating this with someone else." She didn't argue. She didn't lash out. She just nodded slowly, accepting the outcome she once believed she was untouchable enough to avoid. By the time she left, dawn was beginning to stretch pale light across the sky. She paused at the doorway, her silhouette trembling in the early glow. "You were the only person who ever loved me without asking for something," she said softly. "And I treated you like a resource to extract." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." A real apology. Late, broken, but real. And as she walked away, I realized something with a clarity that settled deep into my bones. She didn't lose because I won. She lost because she finally had to face the truth she spent her entire life outrunning. She asked to meet one last time. Not with urgency, not with desperation. Just a quiet message that arrived early in the morning. "I need closure. Please." For a moment I considered ignoring it. I didn't owe her anything. Not an explanation, not forgiveness, not another chance to rewrite the truth. But something in the tone, in the uncharacteristic softness of it, made me agree. Maybe I wanted closure too, though I didn't realize it until I stood across from her again. We met at a small park overlooking the hill where we used to walk on Sunday mornings, back when life still felt simple and love still felt safe. The air was cool, touched by the fading warmth of afternoon sun, and she was sitting on a bench with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered, like someone whose armor had finally been set down, leaving only the person who'd always been underneath. When she looked up at me, there was no spark of manipulation, no attempt to read me like a script, just exhaustion, honesty, and something like grief. "You're calm," she said quietly. "Even now, even after everything that happened, you're calm." I sat beside her, leaving just enough space between us to acknowledge the distance time had carved. "I told you before," I said softly. "I stopped fighting you a long time ago." She stared ahead, watching a family in the distance push a stroller across the grass. "I keep thinking about that smile," she murmured. "The day after the divorce. It terrified me. I didn't understand how you could glow like that when I'd taken so much." I didn't laugh, but I did exhale slowly, letting the truth settle comfortably on my tongue. "That smile," I said, wasn't about you losing anything. It was about me getting something back. She turned toward me, brows drawn. What did you get back? My life. The words didn't strike her like a slap. They settled into her, slowly, painfully, like a truth she had sensed but didn't want to acknowledge. She folded her hands tighter, fingers trembling around each other. You knew, she whispered. You knew everything was going to fall apart for me. I shook my head. I didn't know how it would end. I didn't even expect it to end like this. I just knew I wasn't going to carry your choices anymore. She swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. I used to tell myself you were weak, that you needed me, that without me you'd crumble. Her voice wavered. But I was wrong. I wasn't weak, I said. I was in love. There's a difference. She flinched, not out of anger, but out of recognition. She'd taken advantage of that difference for years, molding it, twisting it, using it to build a version of me she thought would always stay quiet, stay soft, stay beneath her. You could hate me, she said. Most people would. I don't, I answered honestly. Hating you would mean I'm still carrying you. Her eyes shimmered, the fading sunlight catching the wetness at the edges. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just needed to know how you're so calm when everything around me is collapsing. I looked out at the park, the gentle sway of trees, the laughter of distant strangers, the sky drifting toward dusk. And I said the truth, the simplest truth of all. Because the moment the divorce was finalized, I was already free. The rest wasn't my doing. It was your truth catching up to you. She closed her eyes as if absorbing the weight of that. When she opened them again, there was no fire left, only acceptance, quiet, heavy, unmistakable. Will you think of me? She asked softly, a question layered with old memories and broken versions of love. Sometimes, I said, but not with anger. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that marks the end of a long, painful chapter. Then she stood, smoothing her coat with shaking hands. Goodbye, she whispered. Goodbye, I replied. She walked away slowly, not looking back, her silhouette growing smaller as she moved through the park. And as I watched her disappear into the quiet evening, I felt something lift from my chest, the final thread of a bond that had long since frayed. She hadn't been destroyed by my revenge. She had been undone by her own truth. And for the first time in years, the world felt still, open, and entirely mine again.